So, Jamarl, what is your top priority today?
I'm glad you asked that. So, Shane, you can't tell by looking at me. You may not even be able to tell by talking to me, but I have scars. Deep, indelible, often unacknowledged, unseen, but they're there nevertheless. Scars. Typically, I do pretty good at trying to master what took place in 2016 and 2020. And I try to basically push that down, especially with the primary being over with in real terms, with Joe Biden basically winning the nomination and will be coronated as such. But those scars at times get the better of me, and at times they fester and they bleed and they leak out. And this is one of those grotesque moments. I was a Sanders supporter. I think that was very, very clear. My want, my wish, my hope that we could have somewhat of a better system and a better organization of affairs. We may not necessarily be able to get to where I want to go, which is basically somewhat of a cashless society. We may not even be able to get to the point where I want to go in regards to just changes that I believe are just essential in order to get rid of and ameliorate the worst aspects of our economic system. Be it the people who are living on the street, be it the people without health care, the millions of people, be it the people who are dead end jobs or BS jobs that they hate, that they have no agency in, that have appalling conditions, and yet they have to go back and back and back, not because they love it, but because they're forced to do it, and then have to deal with people screaming that that is in some way tantamount to freedom. That's not freedom. I wanted a better world. Even if I can't get my Hyperloop, even if I can't get my flying cars, at the very least, we can deal with the worst aspects of our system that we recognize are horrible aspects. When you get the majority of the population saying, yes, we want Medicare for all, 88% of Democrats, 70% of everybody else. When you get the majority of the public saying, yes, we want to get rid of student debt. It is horrendous that kids who try to get an education that is for the best interest of this country, not just themselves, and it's something that we as a nation should aspire to have our kids do. The majority of the population agrees. Democratic Party, Republican Party, political instrument says kick rocks. I mean, you go down the list with us. A wealth tax, increasing wages to at least $15 an hour minimum wage because they have not in any way caught up with productivity. While that productivity gain had to go somewhere, it didn't just fickle out in space. Well, it did go somewhere. It went to the top 1%. And the higher up you go into that of the 0.1, it goes there. I keep saying, Obama gave 95% of the income to the top 1%. Trump is going to best that number. Even after an economic crash where capitalism hit the skids, the causers, or the people who caused that, didn't go to prison. Obama slipped between them, threw his body on the line, said, I'm between you and the pitchforks. I'm between you and the pitchforks. Now, he didn't necessarily have that much verve and energy when it came to protecting homeowners. No, the pitchforks, he did. Even with Occupy Wall Street, a mass uprising of human beings that said, we're sick of the system, even creating the notion of the 1% and the 99%. He even worked to put those people down while adopting and appropriating the language of the movement itself. I have scars. Sanders, it became clear. And when this became clear, the dollop of hope in me died all at once. When it became clear that despite having the rhetoric and the temperament in order to try to wage a war against a Democratic Party and a Republican Party, basically a political system that have created the outcomes of this level of disparity between different groups. He seemed incapable of waging that war, despite having the language and forming that language and getting a lot of people on board with that language to potentially wage that quote-unquote political revolution. Despite his words, he didn't and couldn't follow through with deed to match up with those words. If you tell me that climate change is an existential threat, that life on this planet in and of itself is going to be materially harmed, that us as human beings, our grandkids or our grandkids' grandkids, may not necessarily be able to live in the world with the opportunities and the habitable space that we did, because we and our previous generations, especially up to the point of the Industrial Revolution, has basically destroyed the planet. We have dumped tons of carbon into our atmosphere. That is a waste product. Now, if they were dumping this into the ocean, or if they were dumping this just outside of your house, you would have feelings about that. But Again, this is something that you can't necessarily see. It's a conceptual thing. And so they're able to basically get along with it, where very few companies are in charge of like 70% of the waste material that's in the sky. Now, if you tell me that, and you tell me the world is at stake, the Republicans just say it doesn't exist, but you, Sanders, you tell me the world is at stake. But then you can't bring yourself to go after Joe Biden and the perpetrators of that system that has done all of these, that has put the world at stake in the first place. Democrats will come on and say, we believe in climate change. However, we need to take an incrementalist approach to dealing with the end of the world. That's ludicrous. And so the guy who had the opportunity to kind of make that case, the dollop of hope in me died when it realized either he was unable to pursue that in real terms or didn't want to. Now, the catch is, whether he wanted to or not, whether he was capable of not, whether this was some kind of gimmick in order to sheepdog or not, he did have the language and the voice for it. He gave brought a lot of people into this particular political discussion when economics, wealth tax, Green New Deal, healthcare, when all of that stuff was not even on the table. He put it there, and he got a lot of people in line to back those policies. Why am I bringing this up? I'm bringing this up because an article by the New York Times has perturbed me a bit. The New York Times comes out with America needs some repairs, here's where to start. Now, people can make the case that Sanders was maybe a little too late, or this crisis that we have, all of these crises, economic, social, where you have all of these people coming up, homeowners going bust. If Sanders had won this primary, what would be the language he was using? Would he be hiding in his basement, or would he make an assertive argument for change? He was calling for a political revolution. Clearly, he would make an assertive argument for change. And yet, all of these people and institutions went after him whole hog, including the Democratic Party itself and media, New York Times particularly. Let's hear Sanders' clip for the moment. Sanders is talking to the New York Times. Let's hear the New York Times make their case. Let's play the clip.
What about the fact that Trump has touched a chord in 40 to 44% of the people? What about that issue? It's like Trump is a symptom of a widespread problem.
Yes.
So, I mean, how do you address that?
What is the issue? How did Trump become president? Not everybody, but tens and tens of millions of Americans feel that the political establishment, Republican and Democrat, have failed them. Maybe the New York Times has failed them too.
That explains the appeal of racism?
Yeah. People are, in many cases in this country, working longer hours for low wages. You are aware of the fact that an unprecedented way life expectancy is actually going down in America because of diseases of despair. People have lost hope, and they are drinking, they're doing drugs, they're committing suicide. And when that condition arises, whether it was the 1930s in Germany, then people are susceptible to the blame game, to say that it is the undocumented people in this country who are the cause of all of our problems. And if we just throw 10 million people out of the country, you're going to have a good job, and you're going to have good health care, and you have good education. That's all we got to do. So all over the world, Trump didn't invent demagoguery. It's an age-old weapon, and you take a minority, and you demonize that minority, and you blame that minority, and you take the despair and the anger and the frustration that people are feeling, and you say that's the cause of your problem.
Right there. New York Times comes out with an article says America needs some repairs. Here's where to start. That same New York Times voted for Amy Klobuchar and Elizabeth Warren. That's the guy who you wanted. Look, we either need to discover that love is indeed our only salvation with an ideology that is true, as invisible as breathing, or we desiccate alone, clawing and gouging out our eyes in some undignified pursuit for imaginary things when abundance is in our grasp. The person who was making that case was Sanders, and the person who they vilified, attacked, who called racist, sexist, bigoted, Trump, all of those things, ends up getting the last laugh. Because the one name that they didn't have in this piece was Bernie Sanders, and that's the one person who was in all of this process who was calling for what this very specific, trying to bend the arc of history itself. Shane, we only have about 30 seconds to a minute left, and we could talk about it a little bit more in the next segment. But Sanders was perfect for this moment. And that was the one guy that the New York Times and all of these other publications attacked relentlessly. And now, all of a sudden, they're taking his mantra